She walked in on a Saturday morning when the gym was already loud. The sound hit her at the door, shoes squeaking on the mat, the sharp crack of pads being struck, voices bouncing off the walls, someone counting reps in a corner, someone else laughing too hard at something that probably was not that funny. A normal Saturday at a competitive martial arts gym, and nobody looked up when the door opened. Maya Grant did not expect them to. She was 46 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that the best thing about being overlooked was that you got to look without being noticed. She stood near the entrance for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to clock every person in the room, every exit, the position of the water cooler, the blind spot behind the heavy bags on the far left wall. 4 seconds. Then she walked to the front desk like she had been there 100 times, which she had not, and signed the waiver the young man slid across to her, without once glancing at his face. She paid the day rate in cash. The young man told her she could leave her bag in the cubbies along the back wall. She thanked him and walked away before he could offer anything else. She had nothing against small talk as a concept. She was simply tired in the way that made it feel like lifting something she had not agreed to carry. The gym was called Iron South. It had been open for 11 years. The walls held photographs of students at competitions, tournament brackets, belt ceremony pictures where everyone smiled wide and the instructor stood in the middle looking proud. It was the kind of gym that had a culture and a vocabulary and a way of reading new people the moment they walked through the door. Rank patches told a story here. Training lineage told a story. Even the way you moved across the mat before a session started told a story to anyone who knew how to listen to that particular language. Maya felt the reading happening before she reached the mat. She had been read in rooms far more demanding than this one. She had brown hair going to gray at the temples, kept short because short was practical, and she had not had time to think about practical alternatives in about 20 years. She was not tall. She was not what anyone in that gym would describe as physically striking. She wore plain dark workout clothes that said nothing about where she had been or what she knew, and she had chosen them exactly for that reason. She wanted nothing to speak before she did, and she did not plan to speak much. She found a space near the edge of the mat and began her warm-up. Not the warm-up of someone performing, not the kind where you move in ways designed to be noticed by the room. She moved through a sequence that was quiet and deliberate, built on a body that had been asked to do serious things for a very long time and had the particular quality of something that has been tested repeatedly in conditions that were not comfortable and has come through the testing without theatrics. Her shoulders rotated fully at the joint. Her hips opened in stages. She ran her hands down the back of her left wrist, pressing carefully at one specific point, the way someone does when they have a long-standing relationship, with exactly where an old injury lives and what it needs before it will cooperate. One person noticed the warm-up for what it was. His name was Colin Webb. He was 24 years old and he was, by any reasonable measure, genuinely talented. He had started training at 13 and had competed at the national level by 18. He held a second-degree black belt and trained 6 days a week without exception. He had a lean, angular face and the confident posture of someone who had been good at something for so long that the goodness had become structural, part of how he held his spine, part of how he entered a room and understood his position in it. He was the unofficial center of Iron South on open mat Saturdays, not because anyone had appointed him, because talent gravitates and people follow talent, and over 11 years this gym had become a place where Colin Webb was the person others oriented around, the one whose opinion about a technique or a training partner carried weight before he had said a word. He was not a cruel person. He was not deliberately unkind. He was simply someone whose confidence had never been seriously questioned, and that particular gap in a person's history tends to create a kind of casual authority that its owner often cannot fully see. He watched Maya for about 90 seconds. Then he leaned over to his training partner, a broad-shouldered man named Pete Howell, and said something low. Pete glanced at Maya and smiled. Not a sharp smile, the easy, reflexive smile of someone agreeing with a person they liked without examining what they were agreeing with. Maya did not hear what was said. She would not have cared if she had. She finished her warm-up and stood. She looked at the mat and at the room with the quick, inclusive, unself-conscious scan of someone who takes in information about their environment as a default function rather than an effort. She assessed the skill levels around her the way she always assessed any environment, quietly, without visible interest, filing what she found somewhere behind her eyes where she kept information she might need later. The gym owner, a man named Frank Dale, came out of the small office near the back. He was in his late 50s, stocky, with a short gray beard and the unhurried walk of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone in this building or elsewhere. He had been running Iron South for 11 years, and he had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things, which made the things that still surprised him worth paying attention to. He saw Maya, and something moved briefly across his face, not surprise. Something closer to a quiet settling, like a piece of information being confirmed. He had spoken to her on the phone 2 days earlier, when she had called about the open mat sessions. She had been brief and specific. She wanted to know about the training culture, whether it was competitive in a way that left room for people who were not competing, whether she would be left alone if she chose to train without explaining herself. Frank had answered her questions honestly, which he considered the only way to answer questions. She had made one request. "Please do not mention my background to anyone." Frank had said of course, and had meant it entirely. He was not in the business of narrating other people's histories to rooms that had not been invited into them. He gave her a small nod from across the gym. She returned it. Then Frank went back to his office and let the morning proceed. Colin Webb crossed the mat toward her at 9:17. He walked with the easy stride of someone who had never seriously questioned whether he belonged anywhere. He stopped a polite distance away, close enough to speak but not close enough to crowd, which told Maya he had some basic manners, and he smiled with his full face, which told her the smile was something he trusted. "Hey," he said, "are you looking for a training partner?" Maya looked at him. "Sure," she said. That was all. Just, sure. He had expected something else from the word. He was not immediately certain what. Something more like the opening of a conversation. She had delivered it like the closing of one. He adjusted, because he was good at adjusting. "I'm Colin," he said. "Second degree." He offered the rank the way people in this kind of gym offered rank. Not boasting exactly, but assuming it was useful information that would orient the interaction. "Maya," she said. She did not add anything to it. "Have you trained before?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "A bit," she said. Pete had drifted nearby. A few other regulars had arranged themselves in the casual way people arrange themselves when they are watching something and do not want to admit they are watching it. The gym's internal culture was already organizing the moment. Colin had moved toward the new woman, which meant the room was positioning itself to observe what that interaction looked like. Maya tied her shoes. There was a scar on the back of her right hand, pale and old, running from the knuckle of her index finger to the base of her wrist. The kind of scar that had been serious once and was now simply geography. Someone near Pete noticed it. Maya neither noticed that they noticed, nor gave any indication that the scar was a subject available for conversation. "Field work," she said, to the general air. Nobody asked what that meant. The phrase sat in the room without landing fully, like something that had been thrown from too far away. Colin set up for a light sparring round. He explained the rules with professionalism. Light contact, tap out freely, stop at any time. She matched his stance and waited for the timer. The timer beeped. She was not where his hands expected her to be. That happened once, then again. He adjusted with the speed of someone who had been training seriously for 11 years, and she adapted before his adjustment finished, which told her what she had already suspected from the first 4-second scan of the room. Her body had not forgotten anything, and what it remembered had been built for requirements that did not include sport. The gym went quiet in the way gyms go quiet when something unexpected is happening in a form that is difficult to explain. Colin was not being beaten in any dramatic sense. He was simply finding that the understanding he had carried onto the mat did not apply to this situation. He had assessed the variables, and this one had not behaved as assessed. He pressed harder. She moved differently. Not faster in the showy sense, more precisely, the way a very sharp instrument differs from a larger, blunt one, not in force, but in where it goes and how little it wastes getting there. He tried to establish a rhythm. She did not share it. Nobody was pretending to train anymore. Frank had come back out of his office. He stood at the edge of the mat with his arms crossed and his face giving nothing away, but his eyes followed Maya with the particular attention of someone who had spent 30 years learning what genuine skill looks like, and was watching it now in a setting where no one else in the room had the vocabulary to name what they were seeing. Maya stopped the round herself, clean, without ceremony. She stepped back and let her hands drop. "Good," she said. She meant it. He was good. She was not being generous. She had trained against people who competed at the highest levels, and she was offering Colin Webb her honest assessment. which was that he was talented and had put in real work, and the gap between what he expected and what happened on the mat was not about lack of skill on his part. It was about a different kind of experience on hers. Colin stood across from her, breathing harder than he had expected to be breathing when he walked out there. The room did not know what to do with itself. Maya walked to the water cooler. She drank from a paper cup, crushed it when she was done, dropped it in the bin. She looked at the clock on the wall. 41 minutes since she had signed in. She went to a corner of the mat and sat down, not because she was tired. Her therapist, Dr. Linda Park, had told her to practice being in large rooms with other people moving around her, without needing to manage every variable, to let the noise exist, to let the movement exist, to sit inside it without organizing it into threat or non-threat, just let it be a room full of people doing ordinary things. She was still learning how to do this. The gym came back to life. People returned to their training, but the hum was different now, and everyone in the room felt the difference even without being able to articulate what had changed. Pete looked at Colin. Colin looked at the mat. Then he looked up at Frank Dale, who was still standing at the edge with his arms folded, and something in Frank's expression answered a question Colin had not yet fully formed. He looked back at where Maya was sitting on the mat. 11 years of training. Hundreds of sparring sessions. He had lost before. He had been caught off guard before. He had been outmaneuvered by people who had trained in different systems and brought techniques he had not encountered. But he had never felt what he felt on that mat. It was not the technique specifically. Technique he could analyze and name and practice his way toward understanding. It was the weight behind the technique. The way every movement she made carried the unhurried, unargued authority of someone who had used those movements in contexts that had nothing to do with a gym. He did not know what those contexts were. He was going to find out, though he did not know yet that he was going to find out, or that finding out was going to change something in him that had needed changing for longer than he had realized. The second Saturday, Maya came back. Colin had not expected this, which told him something about the assumption he had been running, that she had come once out of curiosity and would not return. He understood, sitting with that assumption on the drive to the gym, that he had constructed it because the alternative, that she would come back and he would have to figure out how to be in the same space after what had happened on the mat, was less comfortable to hold. He was wrapping his hands near the entrance when the door opened and she came in. Same plain dark clothes, same short hair, the same drawstring bag that she put in the same cubby she had used the previous week, efficiently, without looking around to reorient herself. She had mapped the room. She was simply using the map. She signed in and walked to the mat with the specific economy of movement that he had now seen enough times to recognize as something built rather than performed. Frank was already there. He had come in early, which was not unusual on Saturdays, but Colin had been in this gym long enough to understand the difference between Frank arriving early because there was inventory to sort, and Frank arriving early because he wanted to be present for something. Today it was the latter. Colin crossed to Maya before he had consciously decided to. She was midway through her warm-up. She looked up at him with an expression that was neither open nor closed, neutral, in the specific way of someone who has become careful with what they let their face say before they know what a situation requires. "Morning?" he said. "Morning," she said. He sat a few feet away and began his own warm-up, which was something he had never done beside a person he did not know well, because he was usually the center of the room's social gravity, and centers do not drift toward edges without a reason. He did it without deciding to, and noticed that he had done it only after. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She kept stretching. "You can ask. What kind of training have you done before this?" She was quiet for a moment. The pause was not hesitation. It was more like the moment before someone reaches for something on a high shelf, a considered reach rather than a reflexive one. "Government work," she said. He waited. Nothing followed. "That covers a lot of ground," he said. "It does," she agreed. He let it go. He was not sure why, because his natural orientation was toward information, and he usually pressed for it without much resistance. But something in the way she answered made pressing feel wrong, in a way he could not immediately explain, like asking for more than had been offered in a context where the offering itself had already been generous. They warmed up in parallel for a few minutes. The gym filled around them. The ordinary Saturday energy built. When they sparred again, it was different from the first time in the way second encounters are always different. He came in with information. She came in knowing he had information. The exchange was more careful on both sides, more deliberate, and the deliberateness peeled back things that speed sometimes covers. He could see now that her defense was built on principles he did not fully recognize, not the structure of competition, something older and more concerned with what happens when a mistake has permanent consequences. He called the round and stepped back. "You're not thinking about scoring," he said. It was an observation, not a question. "No," she said. "What are you thinking about?" She looked at him with gray-green eyes that were steady, in a way that was not performed, but had simply become the default state after years of needing it. "Outcome," she said. He absorbed that. In competitive martial arts, outcome and scoring are practically the same word. He understood that she was telling him they are not. He thought about that single word for the rest of the day. The third Saturday she was there again, and by this point her presence had become something the gym oriented around in the quiet, unannounced way that spaces orient around people who bring something true into them. She trained. She did not perform. She did not push her way into conversations or draw back from them in a way that created drama. She was simply there, doing the work, with a quality that several members described as calm, but were actually describing something they did not have a precise word for. The closest word would have been present, not the ordinary kind of present, the kind that comes from having spent a long time in situations where full attention was the minimum acceptable standard. Nathan Cross was the first one to ask Frank directly. Nathan was 29, had been training at Iron South for 4 years, and had enough experience to know that what he had watched on the mat over 3 Saturdays was not normal, even by the standards of a gym that attracted serious competitors. He found Frank in the storage room going through equipment inventory. "Frank," Nathan said. "Who is she?" Frank kept his eyes on the inventory. "Member," he said. "Frank." Frank put down the clipboard. He looked at Nathan with the considering expression of someone doing a quiet internal calculation. "She asked me not to say," he said. Nathan stood with that. "But you know," he said. "I know," Frank said. "Is she safe to train with?" Frank picked up the clipboard. "She's the safest person in this building," he said. "I mean that in every direction." Nathan left the storage room with more questions than he had walked in with, which was, he realized, exactly what Frank had intended. Colin heard about this exchange from Pete, who had heard it from Nathan, which was how information moved in a place where people spent hours a week in close physical proximity, and therefore talked more than they planned to. By the 4th Saturday, there was a particular quality of attention around Maya that had not been there before. Not hostility, not the performed admiration that was really just a mirror of the earlier dismissal. Something more honest. The attention of people who have understood that they do not understand something and are sitting with that gap rather than filling it with noise. Maya noticed. She always noticed what was happening in a room. She said nothing. On the 5th Saturday, Owen Tate walked in. He was 19 years old and he had the look of someone who had been talking himself into this moment for a while. Nervous in the specific way of people who are afraid, before they have any evidence, that they are about to be told they do not belong somewhere they very much want to belong. He stood near the entrance. Colin saw him from across the gym and recognized the look immediately, because he had worn it himself at 13, and because he understood that the difference between a person who stays and builds something in a place and a person who turns around at the door is very often the first interaction. He moved toward Owen. He did not get there first. Maya had been closer to the door, and she had seen Owen the moment he came in, and she moved toward him with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, without making a production of it, without the slightly performative warmth that people deploy when they know they are being observed being kind. She talked to Owen for a few minutes. Colin watched from where he had stopped in the middle of the floor. He could not hear what she was saying, but he could see Owen's shoulders drop from the tight, defended position they had been in when he walked through the door. He could see Owen nodding. He could see the specific moment when a person stops bracing for a hostile room and starts being in a room. She walked Owen to the mat. She showed him where things were. She explained the warm-up protocol the way someone explains something to a person they consider worth explaining it to, which is the only way that kind of explanation actually lands. She did not oversimplify. She did not rush. She found the level and held it, and within 10 minutes, Owen Tate was on the mat, moving through a basic stance, concentrating hard, with the focused expression of someone who has found something worth concentrating on. Colin stood in the middle of the gym and watched all of this, and felt something shift in his chest that did not have an easy name. He had been at Iron South for 11 years. He was the center of the room. He had always understood his role here as essentially generous. He was a good athlete who shared what he knew when sharing was easy, who welcomed people when welcome cost him nothing, who was kind within the ordinary bandwidth of a person who has never had their own kindness seriously tested. What he was watching now was not the kindness that is easy. It was something that required nothing from the recipient and asked for nothing in return, that carried no visible awareness of itself, that was simply the reflexive behavior of someone for whom looking after other people in difficult moments had become as natural as breathing. He thought about the word she had used, outcome. He thought about the kind of training that produces that particular quality of instinct, where your first reading of a situation is not what is in this for me, but what does this person need right now. He thought about the scar on her hand, field work. He thought about Frank's expression in those early minutes and the quiet calculation behind Frank's answer to Nathan, safe in every direction. He walked to Nathan. "Nathan," he said quietly, "what exactly did Frank say to you?" Nathan repeated it word for word. He was precise by nature. Colin stood with those words, and then he walked across the gym to Frank's office. He knocked twice and opened the door. Frank was at his desk. He looked at Colin with the expression of someone who had known this conversation was coming and had given himself time to prepare. "Sit down," Frank said. Colin sat. Frank was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not absence but substance. "She called me 3 weeks before she came in," Frank said. "Asked about the open mat. Asked whether the culture here was respectful, whether newer people were treated well." He paused. "She also asked whether I had a problem with veterans. I told her we had several members who had served. She said that was not what she meant." Colin waited. "She did not tell me her branch or her role," Frank said. "She told me she had been doing a particular kind of physical work for 18 years, and she needed a place to move again, and that her therapist had advised structured physical activity in a social setting as part of what she was working through." He folded his hands on the desk. "After the call, I looked her up, because I have a responsibility to know who is in my gym, and because I was curious." He stopped. He looked at Colin with the direct, undecorated regard of someone about to say something true. "She spent 12 years attached to Naval Special Warfare Units," Frank said. "She was a combat medic. She did 4 operational deployments. She received a commendation I am not going to describe because it belongs to her, not to me." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you understand what a combat medic working with SEAL teams actually does? What the conditions are? What it means to be the person responsible for keeping people alive in the situations those units operate in?" The gym noise continued outside the office, the ordinary, comfortable noise of a Saturday. Colin did not speak. "She is here," Frank said, "because she is trying to find her way back to something that feels like being in the world. Not because she wants to prove anything. Not because she has something to show anyone." He looked at Colin steadily. "She asked me not to say anything about her background. I'm telling you now because I think you need to understand what was actually in the room the day you decided to perform for your audience." It took Colin a moment to respond. When he did, his voice came out quieter than he expected. "I wasn't trying to be." "I know," Frank said. "That is the part you need to think about." Colin sat with that. Through the office window he could see Maya on the mat. She was showing Owen Tate how to adjust his elbow position. She used her hands to demonstrate, rather than her words to correct. Owen tried it. Got it wrong. She showed him once more, the same way. No impatience. Owen tried again. Got it right. Maya said something and Owen's face changed in the way faces change when they have managed something they were not sure they could manage. Colin thought about 4 deployments, about 12 years in environments he could not imagine, about what it cost a person to carry that, and then to walk into a Saturday gym and be read as someone who needed to be placed, assessed, handled. He stood up. Frank said nothing further. Colin walked to the door and stopped. "Does she know you told me?" he said. Frank looked at the window. "She will," he said, "because you are going to behave differently, and she notices everything within 30 seconds. Colin nodded. He held the doorframe for a moment with no particular intention. Then he went back onto the mat. He did not go toward Maya. He went toward Pete and began his own training, and he moved through the rest of the morning with the quieter, more inward quality of someone who is holding something large and has nowhere to put it yet, except into the work directly in front of him. Near the end of the session, he passed Maya at the water cooler. He stopped. She looked at him. She waited. He did not build up to anything. "I'm going to be a better training partner," he said. "If that's all right with you." She held her paper cup in both hands. She looked at him in the specific way she looked at things when she was deciding whether they were real. A moment passed. "It's all right with me," she said. She refilled her cup and walked back to the mat. He watched her go. Owen was still there, working on the stance. Maya walked over and stood near him, not hovering, just present, watching him work. He tried the movement again. He got it right. Maya gave him one nod, just one. It was the most economical form of encouragement, and somehow the most genuine. Colin turned back to his own training. He worked for another 20 minutes with a focus that had a different quality than his usual. Not better technically. Honest in a different way. He had been training for 11 years and he was good, which was true and real, and the product of genuine work. But being good, he understood now, in a way he had not understood this morning, was not the same as understanding what being good was for. Those were two different conversations, and he had spent 11 years deep in the first one without ever starting the second. He started it now. The information spread through Iron South the way information always spreads in a place where people spend hours a week in close physical proximity. Sideways. In fragments. Shaped by what each person found most striking, and therefore chose to pass forward. What moved through the gym in the days after Frank spoke to Colin was this. Maya Grant had been in the military. Not in the general broad sense that encompasses a wide range of service, in the specific sense of naval special operations, attached to units that operated in environments where the language used in official records was deliberately vague because the actual content was not suitable for public documentation. She had been a medic, which in that context meant something that shared a name with civilian medicine and almost nothing else. A combat medic working in active environments does not work in a hospital, does not have the equipment that hospitals provide, does not have the time or the safety or the option of waiting. The work is done with what is available, under conditions that do not offer comfort as a baseline, in situations where the person doing the work is also a person who must be aware of every other variable in the environment simultaneously, because the environment is trying to end you and everyone you are with, and your job is to make sure it does not succeed, at least not today, at least not for the person bleeding in front of you. This is what it meant. Most of the gym members sat with that information in private. Some of them processed it quickly and moved on. Some of them found it sitting in unexpected places later, in the middle of other thoughts, while driving or eating or lying awake. The ones who had been in the room that first Saturday, who had smiled along with Colin's low comment, who had positioned themselves to watch, found it heaviest. Pete Howell was among the latter. He was not a man who moved through emotional terrain at speed. He was thorough when he arrived somewhere. He spent 4 days with this particular piece of information before he found Colin at the gym on a Tuesday evening, after the regular class had ended, and the space had gone quiet, and the mat was empty. "Hey," Pete said. Colin was cleaning equipment near the storage room. He looked up. "I keep thinking about the first Saturday," Pete said. Colin set down what he was holding. "I stood there," Pete said, "and I smiled. I didn't hear what you said exactly, but I knew the register of it, and I smiled, because it was easy, and because it was you saying it." He stopped. "I don't feel good about that." Colin looked at his friend. Pete was one of the most straightforward people he knew. Not simple. Straightforward in the sense of a person who navigates toward honesty when he has identified it, even when the route is not comfortable. "I know," Colin said. "What do we do with it?" Pete asked, genuinely asking. Colin thought about what Frank had said in the office. He thought about Maya's face when he told her he wanted to be a better training partner, the way she had assessed whether the words were real before she responded to them. "We carry it," Colin said. "And we do better. That is actually it. I don't think she wants anything from us. She didn't come here for us. She came here for her own reasons. And the only thing we can do that matters now is make sure we're not an obstacle to whatever she's working toward." Pete nodded slowly. "Then she's remarkable." "Yes," Colin said, no qualifier, just the word, sitting in the empty gym, doing the work it was built to do. The following Saturday, Maya came back. She always came back. This had become a fact about Iron South, filed alongside other permanent feeling facts like the water pressure in the corner shower being unreliable and Frank's coffee being always too strong. Maya Grant came on Saturdays. She warmed up at the edge of the mat. She trained. She left. but the shape of the room around her had changed. It was subtle in the way that genuine shifts are subtle, not announced, not performed, just present in behavior, which is the only place that matters. Colin arrived earlier than he used to. He moved through his training with more awareness of who else was in the space. He had started asking questions before offering corrections when he worked with newer members, which produced better results and took slightly more time and required slightly more attention, which was the point. He had pulled Pete aside once during the week, and they had talked in the low, specific register of people discussing something they were both still working out. Pete had listened, and then said something that Colin would think about for a while, which was, "The things we assume without evidence are the ones that cost other people the most." Nathan Cross had started something quieter. He had begun introducing himself to people on their first day at the gym before Colin or anyone else could establish the room's initial read of the newcomer. A small structural thing. The kind of intervention that does not look like an intervention but changes the temperature of the first few minutes in ways that ripple. Owen Tate came every Saturday without missing one. He had improved in the way people improve when they have a good teacher, not just technically, but in the quality of their attention. He had stopped being afraid of the mat. He moved with more confidence, which did not mean he moved recklessly, because Maya had told him in their second session that confidence and caution were not opposites. He had written that down in his phone afterward. He had not told her he wrote it down. Frank Dale watched all of this from his usual position. He had spent 30 years building a gym that was serious about its craft and serious about the people who practiced it. He had not always gotten the balance right. No one who runs a human institution does. But he had kept working at it, and the working had produced something worth protecting. He thought about Maya's phone call, the specific questions she had asked, whether the culture was respectful, whether newer people were treated well, whether she would be left alone if she needed to be. He had answered honestly, because honest was the only register he had. But he was aware that a gym is not what its owner describes. A gym is what happens on the mat when the owner is in the back office. He had been hoping, without expressing the hope in those terms even internally, that what happened on the mat when he was not watching would prove his description accurate. He thought it was proving itself accurate, more now than at the beginning. On the 8th Saturday, a moment arrived that Frank would think about for a long time. A new person walked in during the second half of the session, a young woman named Caroline Perry, 22, maybe 23. She had the look that Frank recognized across 11 years of running open mat days. Standing at a threshold she was not certain she had the right to cross, her whole body arranged in the posture of someone who has already half decided to leave before they have given themselves the chance to stay. She looked at the mat. She looked at the front desk. She looked at the door behind her. Most of the gym was mid-session. Frank was near the back. Nathan was on the mat. Pete was working with a training partner near the heavy bags. Colin was closest to the door. He saw Caroline immediately. He recognized the look. He was on his feet and moving across the gym before he had fully formed a decision. He stopped a comfortable distance from the door, not blocking it, just present, just a person, not just a room. "Hey," he said, "are you here for the open mat?" She nodded, a little uncertain, a little relieved that someone had spoken first. "Cool," he said. "I'm Colin. Come in. We can warm up together." She came inside. The door closed behind her. Colin walked her to the mat and explained the space with the patient, non-condescending clarity of someone who had recently been reminded what the first day feels like from the perspective of the person having it. From across the gym, Maya watched this for approximately 4 seconds. Then she went back to what she was doing. She was working on a movement sequence, slow and deliberate, the kind of thing she did when she needed the practice to be about precision rather than intensity. It was quiet work, invisible work, in the sense that it produced nothing dramatic, but it was the kind of work that accumulates, that builds the foundation that dramatic moments rest on, and she had always understood this more clearly than most people she had encountered. She thought about Dr. Park, about the protocol they had been working through for 14 months, about the specific language Dr. Park used, giving the body a space to remember what safety feels like, letting the nervous system relearn what a room full of movement and noise and human proximity is, when that room is not a threat. She was relearning. It was slow. Some Saturdays were easier than others. Some weeks she drove to the gym and sat in the car for several minutes before going in, running through a quiet internal check. You are here. This is a gym. These are people training. You do not have to manage this environment. You can simply be in it. Some weeks that took a while. This week it had taken 2 minutes in the car, which was progress. She moved through her sequence. The gym sounds continued around her. Someone counting, someone laughing, the crack of pads, the ordinary persistent noise of a room full of people trying to get better at something. She let the noise exist. She did not organize it. She did not assess it for danger. She let it be a room. Her therapist would have called that a good session. She called it a Saturday. Frank told her what he had done on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after he had told Colin. He had called her. She had answered on the second ring, which told him she was not someone who let calls go because they were inconvenient. She picked up and said her name and waited. He told her directly. He had shared her background with Colin Webb because he had made a judgment that Colin needed the context. He did not dress it up. He told her he understood if she felt that violated what she had asked of him, and that he took responsibility for the decision. She was quiet for a moment. What did he do with it? She said. Frank told her. The change in behavior, the earlier arrivals, the different way Colin moved through the room with newer members, the conversation with Pete, the Tuesday evening in the empty gym. She was quiet again. All right, she said. All right, Frank repeated. I've seen the change, she said. I noticed it the same day. I wasn't sure what had produced it. A pause. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Frank said. You told me now, she said. That's what matters. She ended the call the way she ended conversations, directly, without ceremony, when the substance of the exchange was complete. Frank sat for a moment with the phone in his hand, thinking about the economy of her, the way she moved through interactions at exactly the necessary speed and no faster, wasting nothing. He thought it was probably the most efficient thing about her, and everything about her was efficient. She came back the following Saturday and the Saturday after that, 14 Saturdays in total since the first one. The gym had settled around her the way a space settles around a person who has decided to inhabit it. She did not own the room. She did not want to. She moved through it with the same quality she had brought on day one, which was the quality of someone who is here for a purpose that belongs entirely to them and requires nothing from the audience. Owen was improving. He had started coming on Wednesdays too, which the gym offered as a skills session. He was working through the technical foundation with the focused patience of someone who has understood that patience is not passive. Maya saw him on those Saturdays and noted the work. She said little. She offered corrections when corrections were useful, and silence when silence was useful, and she had a calibration for the difference that Owen was beginning to trust. He asked her one Wednesday, during a break in the session, how she knew when to say something and when not to. She thought about it for a moment. She was sitting on the mat with a water bottle, and she turned the bottle in her hands in the way she turned things when she was thinking rather than moving. When what you're about to say would change what they do, she said. If it wouldn't change what they do, wait. Owen tried to think of a follow-up question and could not, because the answer had already gone further than he expected, and he needed time to follow it. He wrote that down too. 3 Saturdays after the call with Frank, Maya was doing her warm-up at the usual edge of the mat when Colin walked over and sat nearby, not too close. Nearby. He did not have a question. He did not have an agenda. He sat down and started his own warm-up, and they existed in the same space for a while without needing to narrate it. After a few minutes, he said, "Can I ask you something?" She looked up. "Do you like being here?" he said. "I mean, actually like it." She considered him for a moment. The question was not what she had expected. It was honest in the way that surprised her, which was the only way honesty surprised her anymore. Not in its content, but in finding it in unexpected places. "Yes," she said. "I do." He nodded. "Good," he said. He went back to his warm-up. She went back to hers. It was not a dramatic exchange. It did not resolve anything or arrive anywhere. It was simply two people in the same space being honest about the same space, and in that specific quietness it was, for both of them, exactly enough. Frank saw it from the back of the gym. He did not note it particularly. He was watching the whole room, which was what he did, which was what the room needed, but he registered it in the way that small, true things register, not loudly, but permanently. A few feet away, Owen Tate was practicing the stance he had been learning for 6 weeks. He was getting it, not perfectly. Perfectly was a long way ahead, but he was getting the shape of it, The feel of it, the particular bodily understanding that comes only from repetition and from having someone patient enough to let you repeat until you understand and not just until you execute. He tried it again. It landed. He looked across the mat to where Maya was warming up. She was not watching him. She was doing her own work. But somehow the fact that she was there, that she came back every Saturday, that she had walked toward the door on his first day rather than away from it, had become part of the structure of this place for him. Part of what made it feel like somewhere he could stay and build something. He did not have the words for this yet. He was 19. He would find them. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a building when the people have left and the day's work is done. Not empty quiet, full quiet, the kind that holds the impression of everything that happened in it, the way a held breath holds the shape of the lungs. Iron South had that quiet on a Tuesday evening in November, 6 weeks after Maya Grant's 14th Saturday. The regular class had ended at 8. Frank had stayed to sort a delivery of new equipment. Colin had stayed because he sometimes stayed on Tuesdays when he did not have anywhere else to be, and the gym felt more like where he was supposed to be than anywhere the evening might otherwise take him. He was on the mat alone, moving through combinations, not training for anything specific, just moving. The way you move when you are not trying to accomplish a thing, but are simply using the body, because the body is there, and movement is honest. He stopped. He stood in the middle of the empty mat and looked at the room, the photographs on the walls, the competition brackets, the belt ceremony pictures with their wide smiles and proud instructors, the heavy bags hanging still on the far left wall, the water cooler with its paper cup dispenser, the cubby along the back where a specific drawstring bag had been placed for 14 consecutive Saturdays and then picked up and carried out without ceremony. He thought about the first Saturday, the comment he had made to Pete in a low voice, the way the room had arranged itself to watch, the way he had allowed that arrangement, had walked into the center of it, had been so fluent in that particular room dynamic that he had not needed to think about it at all, which was exactly the problem. The things that require no thought are the ones that need the most examination. He thought about Frank's words. She is trying to find her way back to something that feels like being in the world. He thought about what it meant to do what she had done, for as long as she had done it, and then to walk into a Saturday gym and have the first thing you encounter be someone deciding you were worth a joke. He had not been cruel. He needed to be honest with himself about that. He had not been cruel in the way of someone who intends harm. He had been thoughtless in the way of someone who has never needed to think about it, which was not a defense, but it was a true description. And true descriptions were where you had to start. He had started. He was not finished. He did not think he would be finished for a while, and he had decided that was correct, and that the discomfort of being unfinished was the accurate feeling to be having. People who felt completely resolved about the worst of their own assumptions were usually just people who had found a way to stop looking. He kept looking. Pete had been looking too. Nathan had been looking in his own way, the quiet structural way, arriving early and introducing himself to new people before the room's social weight could do it for him. Owen Tate was building something here with his hands and his attention, and his willingness to return every week and try again, which was the most fundamental form of respect a person could offer a craft. The gym was not transformed. Frank would have been the first to say that gyms do not transform on the strength of one season, or one person, or one set of realizations. A gym is what its people choose to do on the mat over time, accumulated in choices too small to name individually, visible only in aggregate, only in the long view. But the long view was available if you looked. Frank came out of the storage room. He saw Colin standing in the middle of the mat, and he did not say anything, because Frank knew the difference between someone who wanted company and someone who needed the room. He went to the equipment bin and sorted what needed sorting. Colin started moving again, slow, deliberate, working on something specific, a transition he had been imprecise about for months, and had not found the patience to address because there was always something more urgent. He had found the patience recently. He was not sure exactly when it had arrived, only that it had. He worked on it for half an hour. Frank locked up at 10. They walked out together into the November evening. The street was quiet. The city moved through itself the way it always did, indifferent and ongoing. "She's going to keep coming?" Colin asked. Frank looked at the gym door behind them. "She said so," he said. Colin nodded. They walked to their respective cars. Frank drove home. Colin sat in his car for a moment before starting it, not thinking about anything specific. just sitting in the specific way of someone who has had a day that was worth sitting with for a moment before letting it go. He started the car and pulled out of the lot. Across the city, Maya Grant was at her kitchen table. She had a cup of tea. She was reading something, a novel she had picked up because Dr. Park had suggested it. A simple one, she had said. Something you can be inside of without too much effort. Maya had found that the suggestions that sounded simple were often the ones that asked the most of her, but she was working on that. She read for an hour. Then she set the book down and sat for a moment in her own quiet. The apartment was still. She had lived alone for a long time, and she had a relationship with the quiet that was complicated and ongoing, and not fully resolved, which was true of most of the things she was working with. She thought about the gym. She thought about the particular feeling of being on the mat, which was not a comfortable feeling always, was sometimes a hard feeling, but was the feeling of being in her body in a way that her body recognized and was grateful for. She thought about Owen's face on his first day, and the look of someone who has found that a room will receive them. She thought about Frank's honesty and Colin's economy in the water cooler conversation, and the way Pete had begun holding doors open, literally, for people, which was such a small thing, and meant something. She thought about Dr. Park's phrase, giving the body a space to remember what safety feels like. She thought, yes. She finished her tea, she rinsed the cup, she went to bed. In the morning she would wake up and go through the day, which would have the things that days have in them, some of which would be difficult and some of which would not. She would go to see Dr. Park on Thursday. She would come to the gym on Saturday. She would do the work that was in front of her, which was the only work there was. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the whole thing. The Saturday that changed Owen Tate's understanding of what he was learning came not during a sparring session or a technique demonstration, but during a moment so small that he almost missed it entirely. He had arrived early that morning, earlier than usual, because he had trouble sleeping, and had decided that the gym was a better place for the energy he had than his apartment. He let himself in through the side entrance Frank had given him a key to after his fourth Saturday, a small practical gesture that meant more than it should have because it was the kind of gesture that says, "You belong here, here is proof." He was on the mat alone when Maya arrived. He had never been alone with her in the gym before. There had always been other people. The room had always been at least partially full. He was suddenly aware, in the empty space, of how much the presence of the room had been doing for him, filling in the awkwardness, providing a backdrop. He said good morning. She said good morning. She put her bag in the cubby. She came to the mat. She began her warm-up. He watched her for a moment, not intrusively, just with the attention of someone who has been learning from a person and wants to understand the method better. He noticed again what he had noticed before, the precision of the movement, the economy, the complete absence of anything wasted, but he noticed something else this time, something he had not had the frame for before. She moved through her warm-up with the same attention she gave everything, which meant she was not somewhere else. She was not rehearsing her day or managing a background concern or performing her routine for whoever might be watching. She was simply there, fully in the moment of the movement, fully in the moment of the room. He had been reading, over the past few weeks, about the kinds of training and preparation that military special operations personnel went through, not because he wanted to research Maya specifically, which felt like a violation of something she had not offered, but because his curiosity had been opened in a direction, and he had followed it. He had read about the levels of training, the standards, the particular requirements of a combat medic, the dual competencies required, the conditions under which those competencies were expected to perform. He had found it, as most people find such things, staggering. He had also found something that stayed with him more than the specific facts. He had read a description, in a memoir by a former special operations medic, of the quality of attention required to do that work well. The author had described it as being entirely where you are, not partly there, not there with reservations, entirely. He thought about that now, watching Maya move through her warm-up in the empty gym. She was entirely where she was. He thought about his own training over the past weeks, the times his mind had drifted during a session and she had noticed, not called it out, just adjusted what she was doing in a way that brought him back without shaming him for having left. He thought about the times he had gotten something right and felt the specific satisfaction of a body learning something true, and how she had acknowledged those moments with the minimum necessary signal and moved on, because drawing them out would have been about his feelings rather than his development. He thought about what Colin had told him once, briefly, in passing, about the first Saturday. Colin had not told him the whole story, just enough to make clear that something had been wrong and something had been corrected. He had told it without self-pity or self-congratulation, simply as a factual account of an action and its consequence, and the work that followed. Owen had not asked for more. He had understood that more was not his to ask for. Other people began arriving. The gym filled, the Saturday hum built. Colin came in and nodded at Owen and started his own warm-up. Pete arrived, Nathan, several people Owen now knew by name, which had happened gradually and felt permanent, the way belonging to a place always feels permanent once it settles. Frank came out of the office and stood at the back of the room, checking something on the clipboard he carried, but not really checking it, just being present in the way he was always present, the way that buildings are held up by structures you do not see until you think about them. The session ran for 2 hours. Near the end, Colin was working with Owen on something specific, a defensive movement that Owen had been approaching wrong for 3 weeks, in a way he had not been able to identify. Colin had seen it the previous Saturday and had spent the week thinking about how to explain it. He tried now with a particular phrasing, a way of describing the weight distribution that was different from what he had tried before, and Owen's body understood it immediately, the way bodies understand things when the key finally fits. Owen did it right. Then again. Then again. Colin said, "There it is." Owen was breathing hard. He was grinning in the way of someone who has just found a thing they were not sure they would find. He looked across the mat. Maya was finishing her own session, bag already on her shoulder. She was saying something to Frank. Whatever it was made Frank nod and then almost smile, which on Frank's face was the equivalent of anyone else laughing loudly. She walked toward the door. She passed Owen on her way. She stopped. She looked at him for a moment, at his stance, at the positioning of his weight, which had been wrong for 3 weeks, and was now right. She gave him one nod. Not a big nod, not the nod of someone completing a gesture, the small, direct nod of someone who has seen something true and is acknowledging it, nothing more. Then she walked out. Owen stood on the mat. He thought about being 19 years old and standing at the door of this gym for the first time, looking at the mat, looking at the people, looking at the door behind him. He thought about her crossing the room toward him, not rushing, just moving, the economy of it, the complete absence of performance. He thought about being someone who needs a room to receive them, and having the first person in the room be someone who had spent 12 years in conditions he could not fully imagine, and had come back from those conditions and walked into a Saturday gym, not to prove anything to anyone, but because she was trying to remember what the ordinary world felt like, and the ordinary world was this: a mat, and people working, and someone at the door who needed a moment of being seen. He thought about the nod she had just given him. One nod, for something earned, nothing added, nothing performed, the exact weight of the moment and no more. He thought, this is what it looks like, when someone has spent a long time around things that matter, and has learned to only do the things that matter, and has brought that back into a place like this. He thought, I want to be someone who does the things that matter. He did not say this out loud. He was 19, and these thoughts felt large and private, and not quite ready to be in the air. But he held it. He was still holding it when the session ended and the gym emptied, and he walked out into the morning, which was ordinary and bright and smelled like November, which smelled like everything continuing. Colin left the gym at the same time. They walked to the parking lot together. Good session, Colin said. Yeah, Owen said. They reached their cars. Owen put his bag in the back. He looked at the gym door. Hey, Colin, he said. Colin looked over. How do you know, Owen said, when you've actually gotten better? Like, how do you know it's real and not just the feeling of it? Colin thought about this. He thought about 11 years of training. He thought about a first Saturday in November and a woman who had corrected his understanding of a room without saying a word to him directly about it. He thought about what it had felt like to change, which was not comfortable and was not dramatic, and was not the way he had imagined growth would feel when he was 24 and certain of most things. When you do the right thing, Colin said, and you don't have to think about whether it's the right thing first. Owen considered that. Is that where you are? Owen said. Colin smiled. Not the full, easy smile he wore when he was performing his confidence. The other kind. The smaller kind that belongs to someone who is in the middle of something and knows they are in the middle of it. Not yet, he said. Working on it. He got in his car. Owen stood in the parking lot for a moment longer. Then he got in his car too and drove home through the November morning, and the city moved through itself all around him, indifferent and ongoing and full, as it always was, of people trying to get somewhere better than where they started. The gym door behind him was already closed. The mat was quiet. Next Saturday it would be loud again. That was the whole thing. That was exactly the whole thing.